Hello and welcome to Off the Beaten Tracks, where the plaintive cry of the kookaburra marks the end of a well-spent day. I'm going to do an all-Canadian show today, and I'm going to start off with this interesting album. This is the Stringband, Thanks to the Following. And this is on Nick Records from 1977. It's their third album. And the title, basically, Thanks to the Following, is just that, because it starts here in the fine print with Helen Alto, and goes all these names here to Arnie Zweig. And those are the people who put up money to make this album. I don't know whether they approached them at clubs, at their friends, or whatever, but there's got to be at least 100-odd people here, and they financed this record. Apparently, when they were shopping their second album around, they went into Attic Records, and a guy named Al Mayer told them that they would make more money selling 1,000 albums that they produced themselves than if they got onto a label and sold 10,000 albums. So that's precisely what they did. They kept producing them under the Nick Records label, and basically they would, on this one, they raised the money themselves and basically sold these in clubs. And there's a little thing back here where you, with a phone number, and these albums cost $5.50. If you bought a second album, it was $4.50. I just think that's marvelous. I just think starting your own thing, bypass everybody. Now, on the second album that I just talked about, Ben Mink was in the band. And he went on to produce just about everybody in Canada, plus Alison Krauss, Hart, Roy Orbison, Elton John. He's probably most famous, though, for being the major collaborator with K.D. Lang. But back to this. This is kind of a flashback to those really popular bands that were folk bands in the early 60s. It's a really nice mix of folky-type songs, and half of them are originals. And it's not the type of album I usually like. There's a song called I Don't Sleep with Strangers Anymore, kind of a story song that she sings about some young guy coming up after a show and saying, I just want to come up and talk. And she says, no thanks, I don't sleep with strangers anymore. Not my usual cup of tea, but I don't know, for some reason, her voice, it's very appealing. Her name is Marie Lynn Hammond, and she writes 4 or 5 of the songs on this album and does a lot of the vocals. Plays auto harp. How much folkier can you get than the auto harp? There are a couple of instrumentals on this. Indiana is a nice switch up after the ballad. I thought there was some fine playing on this. This band has a sense of humor. And I'm not quite sure why I like this album, but I do. And I'm going to give it a solid 7. My next album is, this is Bob Ruzicka, Landfall. We've got the old gatefold here, and there's Bob. I've discussed Bob before on this channel. I think he's from Edmonton or somewhere out west, and is the singing dentist. He is actually a licensed and practicing dentist. If you're a practicing dentist, always good to be licensed. That's all I'm going to say on the subject matter. This is on Mustard Records from 1980. This is his last album. I think he put out 5 or 6 albums all through the 70s. It's a lot more poppy or well-produced, or let's say poppily produced, than his earlier albums, which, because he's a folkie, but there's a pop sheen on this, but it doesn't really detract from it. I quite liked it. I really liked the Streets of Whitehorse, which is on this. There's a touch of James Taylor and Jim Croce in his voice. Really, this album just had a lot of charm to it, and I'm going to give it a 7. For my next album, I'm going to do Jato. I assume it's Jato. Not a very good name for a band, and not a very good album cover. This was put out by Parallel One Records in 1987. It's a rock album produced by Bob Rock, a famous Canadian producer. The band's name used to be Tukoi Ride. And I don't quite know why they switched their name, but they did, and then they got this record deal. And apparently it wasn't a very good record deal. They put out a couple of expensive videos, and they were had songs played on the radio, but apparently Parallel One Records couldn't get their act together, and there was no product to put in the stores. Back then, of course, this is 1987, you needed product, you needed things to sell in stores, and they were touring around and doing interviews and getting songs on the radio, and there was just no records. There's nothing. There's no vinyl. This is very 80s sounding. It's got those thunderous drums. It has 4 credits on this for keyboard and Fairlight programming, just to give you an idea. You know, the songs are okay, but they are buried in that keyboardy, thumpy, drummy production kind of thing. I was going to give this a 5.5. Then Like a Fire came on, and I thought, oh, I kind of like that song. It was something that actually cut through a bit of the keyboard bombast on this thing. So I'm going to put it up to a 6, because by the time I listened to the second side, which I think is better than the first side, I thought I'd be a little more charitable to it. But yeah, if you can get past that first side, the cover's a 4, maybe even a 3.5. Jato, Parallel One Records, just not very good. For my next album, I'm going to go back to the folk genre. I got this off Discogs. Wayne Rostad, writer of songs. There's the back. Gatefold. And this is from Stag Creek Music from 1979. It's folk country kind of an album. This was his first record. This album starts off quite poorly. There's a story song about social injustice, and not that there isn't social injustice. There is. This just isn't a very good song talking about it. The lyrics are just way too heavy-handed. On the other hand, I did quite like Good Time Lady, which is a nice, slightly up-tempo country song. The production on this is that older style country music. It's not that overproduced, poppy, glitzy stuff that they got into. So that is, I think this is savings grace. It's a very small town album. It laments things changing. It pays tribute to a local gas station. I think the up-tempo songs are the best. The ballads don't really have enough tune or word wizardry in them to make them that appealing. And this was a real actually eye-opener for me for how long I've been out of Canada, because I'd never heard of this guy. It's a blind buy, but it turns out that he was on a television show as the host for 20 years, and he's won a Juno, which is the Canadian Grammy, and 8 Gemini Awards, which is the Canadian Emmys. And yet he was as a mystery to me as this dark figure walking across the snow here. So yes, Wayne Rostad, obviously, if you're Canadian and have actually stayed in this country, you would know exactly who this man is. I forgot, I'm going to give this album a 6.5. For my last record today, this is an EP. This is the Manvils, and this is their Expats EP. This is self-produced and was put out in 2014. They have 2 albums and 2 EPs to their name. This is the second EP they released. It's described on Discogs as garage rock, but really to me it's just more of a rock album. I don't really quite see the garage in it. I mean, there's not a lot of the standouts in this album. Expats, the title song, is very, very good. I like this. It's kind of a big guitar sound band, and they might remind you a little of Remy Zero. I'm going to give this a 7.5 to an 8. At the moment, for me, this is like a 7.5, but I can tell that the more I listen to this, the more I'm going to like it. So I would recommend definitely the Manvils Expat EP, 7.5 to 8.
Okay.